You'd think the neighborhood HOA would at least knock before commandeering someone's private pool for a full-blown, wine-soaked vow renewal ceremony. But no, they just taped an invitation to my front door with a note that said, "See you Sunday. Can't wait for the photos." The problem? I never agreed to host it. In fact, I'd explicitly told them no. Twice. So imagine my confusion when I came home to see a team of decorators unloading folding chairs, floral arches, and a suspiciously expensive string quartet onto my property, 2 days early. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when I confronted the wedding planner standing ankle-deep in my pool, clipboard in hand, and she told me, "Oh, Karen said this whole place was HOA common property now. She's the board president, so she can approve it. You're just a resident." My pool, my backyard, my lawn. Suddenly a shared resource, because Karen decided she needed a more aesthetic setting for her sister's vow renewal than the clubhouse lawn. That's when I realized I was dealing with something far more dangerous than incompetence. Entitlement backed by amateur legal theories and Pinterest boards. And if she wanted war, well, lucky for me, I had a hose, a pump, and a petty streak that runs deeper than a freshly tiled deep end. It all started a month earlier, when I received a strange email from the HOA with the subject line, "Community Space Clarification." Inside was a 4-paragraph essay about how certain backyard amenities that open directly into the public view line may be subject to shared access events. I blinked at the screen. Was this about my pool? I'd recently had a new privacy fence installed, but for 3 months before that, the old one had been leaning like it was in hospice care. Karen had commented multiple times about how inviting the pool looked from the walking trail. I'd laughed it off. Apparently, that was a mistake. I replied with a short email saying my pool was private, on my deed, and not subject to public access. A few days later, I got another email. This one was shorter, colder. "We'll take it under advisement. Please keep July 7th available in case the board determines otherwise." I ignored it. What were they going to do? Jump the fence? Turns out the answer was yes. Because on July 5th, I came home to find a pair of lawn care guys ripping up my grass near the gate, claiming they were widening the entrance for a rented platform that would go over the pool. One of them even asked me where I kept the power outlet. That's when I snapped. I told them to pack up and leave or I'd call the cop. They shrugged and left, but one of them mumbled, "You better talk to Karen. She's already paid for setup." That night, I marched down to Karen's stucco palace of passive aggression, where the garden gnomes wore seasonal outfits and the doorbell played Beethoven. She answered in full HOA regalia, clipboard, polo shirt, name badge like she was running for HOA President of America. She gave me that thin-lipped smile people use when they're about to gaslight you. I didn't even get 3 words in before she cut me off. "Oh, don't worry, we'll clean up everything after. It's just for the ceremony." And we voted unanimous. Temporary event access. I told her she had no right. She countered with, actually, Article 17.3b of the bylaws. Any property visually accessible to more than 20 homes may be used for communal events if it provides unique value. I blinked. She had a laminated copy of the bylaws in her hand. Laminated. She'd highlighted it. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm good with contracts. I pulled up the plat maps and HOA rules that night and found out exactly what I suspected. My lot, including the pool, was a fully independent parcel. The HOA had 0 claim to it. I even checked with a friend who worked in zoning. His reply? "They're bluffing. If they show up, sue them for trespassing and violation of property right." Hell, I'll testify. But I didn't want to stop them in court. I wanted to stop them in their heels, preferably while carrying champagne flutes and sobbing over ruined curls. So I started planning. The next day, a white rental tent showed up on my lawn. I didn't touch it. I didn't say a word. I waved at the crew and brought them lemonade. Karen was watching from her porch like a queen inspecting her domain. Her sister, just as blonde, loud, and tan as Karen but 5 years younger, came by to check the angles. I offered to let them walk around and take photos. I even moved some furniture so they'd have better symmetry. They looked so smug, so pleased with themselves, that I almost felt bad for what was coming. Almost. The day before the ceremony, I installed a pump in the deep end and ran a hose through a backyard grate that drained into the storm runoff system. I even gave it a little camouflage with a patio cushion. Then I set the timer for 4 a.m. The next morning, the chaos started at 8:15. I know that because that's when Karen called me in a blind panic, screaming that, "The pool is empty. Where's the water?" I sipped my coffee and told her I had no idea. Maybe it evaporated. Climate change is a real problem, Karen. 30 minutes later, her sister was in my backyard shrieking at the wedding planner. The string quartet was standing around awkwardly while folding chairs sank into the muddy pool deck. The tent had buckled slightly on one side, which made the archway lean like a drunken sailor. Karen burst through my side gate without knocking, demanding to know why I'd sabotaged her event. I calmly handed her a printed copy of my deed, with the pool clearly marked as private, and asked her to leave before I called the police. She sputtered something about board rights, but when I told her I'd spoken to a zoning attorney and had documented every unauthorized use of my land, she turned a shade of red that made her look like a cartoon villain. The guests started arriving around 10 o'clock. Most were confused. A few looked embarrassed. One guy actually said, "Wait, this isn't the clubhouse?" Karen tried to salvage the event by relocating to her backyard, which was half the size and nowhere near as aesthetic. The tent didn't fit, the arch snapped during transit, and someone tripped over a bundle of cable and knocked over the speakers. The highlight came when her sister, halfway through her vows, paused to yell, "I can't believe this is happening, Karen!" loud enough for the entire block to hear. I clapped. I couldn't help it. By noon, most of the guests had gone home. Karen and her sister stood in the yard surrounded by soggy chairs, melted candles, and a deflated sense of self-worth. I stood by my kitchen window and watched the wreckage with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. But later that evening, I did refill the pool, just in time for my own barbecue the next day. I made sure the music was loud, the grill was hot, and the guest list included everyone except Karen. She watched from her porch in silence, sipping something that looked like vinegar through a bendy straw. The Monday after the pool fiasco, Karen tried to spin the whole disaster like it was a weather-related fluke. A freak drainage malfunction, she called it. Not sabotage. Not negligence. Just one of those quirky, uncontrollable acts of God that happen when the universe decides to ruin a bridal vow renewal. She even circulated a memo to the neighborhood with that exact phrase, "Act of God," as if the Almighty himself had come down to personally siphon 22,000 gallons out of my deep end. Most of the neighbors knew better. I saw the looks, the barely concealed smirks. Mr. Conway, who lived 3 doors down and had hated the HOA ever since they made him paint over his brick mailbox, actually gave me a thumbs up as I walked my trash can to the curb. Karen must have seen it too, because the next day she filed a formal complaint against me for creating hostile neighborhood sentiment. I laughed when I got the letter. It was hand-delivered by one of the junior board members, a twitchy guy named Brett who looked like he'd never successfully parallel parked in his life. He handed me the envelope like it was a jury summons, then practically jogged back to his Prius. Inside was a 2-page write-up, citing violations of decorum, cooperation, and public morale. According to Karen, I had undermined community trust, interfered with an authorized HOA event, and damaged the neighborhood's external reputation. She demanded a $1,500 fine, payable within 10 days. I took a picture of the letter, circled the word morale in red ink like a teacher correcting a term paper, and mailed it back to her with one sentence. "Try again, Karen." That must have been the final straw, because the next morning, things escalated. I woke up to a loud grinding noise outside my window, and when I stepped onto the porch, I saw a rented pressure washer blasting the decorative tiles around my pool deck. A crew of 2 guys, different from before, were scraping off algae that wasn't there. They said they were performing maintenance per HOA sanitation standards. I told them to stop. They refused. I called the cops. That finally got their attention. The workers packed up their stuff so fast, one of them left a nozzle behind. The officer who responded asked if I wanted to file a report. I said I'd wait. I had a feeling Karen wasn't done yet. And I was right. 2 days later, a drone started flying over my backyard at exactly 7 a.m. each morning. It hovered, buzzed, tilted at odd angles like a drunk mosquito, then zipped back toward Karen's house. I knew it was hers because it landed in her hydrangeas. I figured she was fishing for some kind of violation, maybe a noise complaint or evidence that I wasn't cleaning my gutters properly. So I gave her a show. Every morning I walked into my backyard in the ugliest robe I owned, holding a hairdryer like a pistol, and glared up at the drone. I even named it Karen Cam. Later that week, I received an email with attached aerial photos. They showed a single pool float, a few dry leaves, and what appeared to be a tiny splash near the drain cover. The email accused me of unsanitary pool conditions and failure to maintain community standards. I forwarded the message to my lawyer friend with the subject line, "New HOA Comedy Routine." He responded by drafting a cease and desist order and mailing it directly to Karen, along with a photocopy of the Fourth Amendment and a short note that read, "Stop filming private property. This is your only warning." But the real fun began when I started digging through HOA records. See, my neighborhood's HOA was big on bureaucracy but sloppy with their documentation. Minutes from meetings were often missing timestamp. Votes were recorded without participant names, and budget allocations were vague at best. I submitted a formal records request, citing homeowner transparency rights. They had to comply. And what I found was gold. Karen had been funneling community maintenance funds into projects that just happened to benefit her property, things like sidewalk repairs that stopped directly in front of her house, tree trimming exclusively around her yard, and pest control contracts that oddly enough skipped the rest of the block. She even charged the HOA for a decorative mailbox initiative, which turned out to be just one ornate iron mailbox, hers. Armed with this information, I attended the next HOA meeting. I brought popcorn. I sat in the front row. When the agenda item came up, review of recent property complaints, Karen began her usual monologue about neighborhood cohesion and personal accountability. That's when I interrupted. Calmly. I pulled out printed copies of the financial reports and highlighted discrepancies. Then I passed them around. A hush fell over the room like someone had unplugged the entire neighborhood's electricity. Brett coughed. Mr. Conway chuckled. Karen turned pale, then flushed bright pink. She tried to deflect, something about clerical errors and ongoing beautification efforts. But it was too late. The board, spineless as they were, couldn't ignore the evidence. A motion was made to audit all discretionary spending from the last 18 months. Another motion followed. Suspend Karen from her role as treasurer until the audit concluded. Both passed. She didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. She just sat there, arms folded, jaw tight, cheeks twitching like a malfunctioning ventriloquist dummy. The next day, her husband stopped me while I was getting the mail. He wore socks with sandals and had the permanent tan of a man who spends too much time micromanaging other people's lawns. He didn't say hello. He just squinted and said, "You think this is over?" I told him it hadn't even started. Then I smiled because I meant it. I had one last card to play. The HOA's charter had a clause, rarely used, almost forgotten, that allowed any member to propose a special vote to remove the board president if they could collect signatures from 30% of the homeowners. With 120 houses in the neighborhood, that meant I needed 36. I got 49. Turns out, a lot of people were tired of Karen's antics. One guy said she once threatened to fine him for improper Halloween lighting. Another claimed she'd dug through his recycling to make sure he wasn't throwing away batteries. When I showed them what she'd been doing with the budget, they practically threw pens at me to sign. The special vote was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Karen must have gotten wind of it because she suddenly turned into Mother Teresa. She started waving at people. She hosted a community smoothie morning in her driveway. She even offered to help Mrs. Ramirez repaint her garage door. But it was too late. Her charm offensive couldn't undo years of passive-aggressive tyranny, nor the visual of her sister screaming mid-vows while standing ankle-deep in a drained pool. On the night of the vote, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, some sipping coffee like they were at a live podcast taping. I kept quiet until it was my turn. Then I stood up, thanked everyone for coming, and walked them through what we'd discovered: the misappropriated funds, the fabricated citations, the misuse of property, the drone surveillance. I didn't rant. I didn't yell. I just told the truth and let the facts do their work. The morning after the vote, I found a glittery, half-shredded "Recall This" sign staked into my lawn, tilted sideways and surrounded by smashed eggs. Karen's signature chaos. I sighed, took a photo for documentation, and cleaned it up before my coffee even finished brewing. She was lashing out, but she was also done. Her throne was gone, her cronies were scattered, and the special audit was just getting started. Still, I knew Karen well enough to understand she wouldn't go quietly. If she couldn't rule the HOA, she'd try to sabotage it from the shadows, and failing that, she'd make sure to make me as miserable as possible on her way out. What she didn't know was that I was already working on my endgame. And it started with a very unexpected property listing. About a month earlier, just as Karen was ramping up her passive-aggressive harassment campaign, I'd noticed something odd while walking my dog. One of the parcels of land near the community clubhouse, a long-forgotten strip of woods next to the retention pond, had a small surveyor's flag planted in it. I checked the parcel ID online. It wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't owned by the city. It was privately held by a shell company that had gone defunct during the housing crash 10 years ago. And now it was up for auction due to unpaid taxes. Minimum bid? $12,000. I did some digging. That strip of land, though mostly undeveloped, included the clubhouse's electrical junction box, the bike rack, and half of the paved walking trail the HOA had spent $5,000 resurfacing last year. And the clubhouse itself? Built right on the edge, overlapping the boundary by exactly 4.7 feet. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Now, technically, I couldn't evict the HOA from their own clubhouse, but I could charge them rent, or access fees, or parking permits. I could even gate the walking trail or build a storage shed that would completely block off the lake view Karen loved to brag about during board meetings. All legally. So after securing the land at auction under my own LLC, I sat on it, quietly, patiently, waiting until the exact right moment. That moment came 2 weeks after the audit revealed Karen had authorized nearly $3,200 for community landscaping enhancements, all of which were installed in her backyard and billed to the HOA as botanical demonstration zones. Her attempt to defend it during a public hearing was almost impressive. She claimed the landscaping uplifted the neighborhood's spiritual alignment and offered feng shui benefits to nearby homes. The board didn't buy it. The hearing ended with a second vote. Karen was banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. Her husband threatened to sue, then slipped on a decorative rock outside the clubhouse and had to be escorted to urgent care. Karma's a minimalist when she's doing her best work. I gave it 3 days. Then I emailed the board with a formal notice. They were trespassing on parcel 113F, and as of next quarter, I'd be charging a modest access fee of $1,000 per month to continue use. I attached diagrams showing the clubhouse footprint crossing the line and included GPS measurements, timestamped. The board freaked. Half of them didn't even know that strip of land wasn't part of HOA property. Brett, now acting president in the wake of the recall, called me in a panic. "Can we negotiate?" he asked. "This will bankrupt the social budget." I told him I was open to terms. In exchange for waiving the fees, I requested one thing: full exemption from all HOA restrictions and fines for the duration of my ownership of Lot 24. That included my house, pool, and front yard. No citations. No inspections. No Karen-style nonsense. Brett agreed within 24 hours. The new contract was signed, notarized, and distributed to every board member. I even laminated my copy and pinned it next to my grill. Karen saw it 2 days later while walking her yappy dog past my yard. She stopped, stared, and turned purple. I expected her next move to be something petty, and she delivered. One morning I woke up to find a complaint about excessive plant height taped to my mailbox, signed not by the HOA, but by a concerned neighbor. I trimmed the plant to spell the word nope. The next week, she sent a letter to the City Code Enforcement Office claiming I was running a business from my garage because she saw boxes being delivered. The inspector showed up, saw the Amazon packages, and left laughing. I offered him a soda on the way out. But even Karen couldn't outmaneuver the audit findings. The board voted to pursue reimbursement. They demanded she pay back nearly $7,800 in misused funds. She claimed she couldn't afford it. They offered a payment plan. She scoffed. Eventually, the HOA placed a lien against her property, a humiliating blow for someone who once fined a neighbor for having mismatched porch light. The best part? With her gone, the new board actually improved. They updated the bylaws to remove the shared use clause Karen had twisted to justify using my pool. They hosted a real vote about whether to allow more outdoor decor flexibility, something Karen had blocked 3 years running. It passed unanimously. The neighborhood was finally breathing again. But there was still one last act of closure I couldn't resist. Karen had always treated the clubhouse like her personal throne room. Even after she was ousted, she kept trying to schedule informal gatherings there, probably just to feel important. So I made a call to a friend of mine who owns a local yoga studio and offered them use of the land next to the clubhouse for outdoor sessions. They accepted. A week later, 10 sweaty yoga moms in spandex were doing downward dogs 5 feet from Karen's back fence, blasting peaceful flute music and burning incense. She called the HOA to complain. They reminded her she wasn't on the board anymore. Then they reminded her the land wasn't theirs. Then they reminded her that the land was mine. She stopped leaving her house for a while after that. My favorite moment came a few weeks later, during the neighborhood block party. It was the first one hosted by the new board, and it was actually fun. There were food trucks, live music, a raffle, even a dunk tank. Brett took 2 full hours in it and made $300 for the dog rescue fund. I was walking back to my house when Karen emerged from her front door, moving slow, like she wasn't sure the neighborhood wouldn't hiss at her. She approached cautiously, holding a casserole dish like it was a white flag. "Hey," she said, voice tight. "I made green bean almondine. If you want." I stared at the dish, then at her, then smiled. "Sure, Karen," I said, taking the tray. "But just so you know, if you try to drone me again, I will install a radar jammer in my grill." She blinked, half smiled, then turned and walked back inside. That was the last time she tried anything. I didn't need her apology. I didn't even need her respect. All I needed was for her to stop. And thanks to a drained pool, a strategically timed land purchase, and the support of every neighbor she'd ever wronged, I got exactly that. If you had told me 6 months earlier that I'd one day own the legal rights to the land underneath the HOA clubhouse, I probably would have laughed and gone back to skimming leaves out of my pool. Back then, Karen was untouchable, queen of the clipboard, ruling by fine and passive-aggressive decree. But now? She was reduced to peeking through her shutters like a bitter raccoon in a golf visor. The clubhouse was no longer her turf. The neighborhood had turned against her. The board was repairing the damage she left behind. And me? I was just getting comfortable. There's a strange kind of peace that settles in when your enemy has been neutralized, but I didn't trust it right away. Karen was too theatrical, too committed to the art of petty vengeance to go cold that fast. I kept expecting something, maybe another anonymous complaint, or a new proxy she'd install on the board. Instead, what came next was almost sad. And then, very quickly, very entertaining. It started with a realtor's sign in Karen's yard. At first, I thought she was bluffing, just trying to stir up drama or get the board to cave on her lien by threatening to leave. But then the listing hit the MLS. I found it online one night while sipping tea and scrolling the neighborhood Facebook group. Charming two-story home in a tight-knit community with shared amenities and a strong neighborhood association. I nearly choked. The only thing strong about the association anymore was the coffee at board meetings. But sure enough, there it was, photos of her kitchen, her meticulously staged backyard, and yes, even the clubhouse in the background despite it being built partially on land she no longer controlled. The comments were brutal. One person asked if strong neighborhood association was code for dictatorship disguised as bake sales. Another joked about installing surveillance cameras in their birdhouses. Someone else asked if the buyer would inherit the lien. The answer, of course, was yes. The next week, I ran into the realtor during an open house. She was cheerful, overly rehearsed, and clearly in way over her head. I asked her casually if the sale included full clubhouse access. She nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Karen mentioned it's a cornerstone of the community experience. I smiled and handed her a printed map of the parcel lines, complete with the rental agreement I'd made with the HOA. Her face dropped as she scanned the paper. Wait, she doesn't own this land? Not even a little, I said. Karen must have gotten an earful, because the listing changed a few days later. The clubhouse disappeared from the photos. The line about the tight-knit community got rewritten into something bland and generic. Convenient location, lots of potential. The price dropped. Twice. No bites. I'll admit, I felt a tiny twinge of guilt watching her lose her grip on everything. But it passed quickly, especially when I saw her standing in her driveway one afternoon, arguing with her husband in stage whispers about liquidating something. Later that week, a luxury patio set vanished from her yard, replaced by cheap folding chairs. A few potted plants went missing. The string lights, her pride and joy, came down. It was like watching an HGTV show in reverse. Renovation, Recession Edition. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was thriving. Without Karen's meddling, the board actually got things done. A new landscaping contractor was hired, replacing the one Karen's cousin ran at double the market rate. The community newsletter stopped reading like a list of passive-aggressive threats and started featuring local kids' lemonade stands and bake sales. We even had a Dog of the Month spotlight. Mr. Conway's corgi won twice, despite peeing on every tire he encountered. One afternoon, I was grilling in my backyard when Brett stopped by. He looked relaxed for the first time in months, holding a beer and wearing a t-shirt instead of his usual panic-induced dress shirt. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, grinning. "Karen called a lawyer." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, she's trying to challenge the lien? Worse. She's threatening to sue the HOA for harassment and defamation. Claims we ruined her property value." I nearly dropped the tongs. "The woman who organized a literal unauthorized wedding in my backyard is claiming she's the victim?" "Yep. And she says the pool incident damaged her emotional health." "Oh, please. She drained my sanity long before I drained that pool." Brett laughed so hard he choked on his beer. Then he told me the kicker. The HOA's new legal counsel sent her a politely worded letter in response, one that included a full list of the documented complaints, drone surveillance reports, financial misappropriations, and a neat little threat to countersue for board manipulation and breach of fiduciary duty. She went silent after that. Or so we thought. 3 weeks later, a rumor spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Karen had accepted an offer on her house, but not to sell it, to rent it, to an out-of-state company that specialized in corporate housing. Translation? Strangers. Possibly short-term renters. Maybe even, God forbid, college students. The Facebook group exploded. People were terrified of parties, noise, property neglect. HOA bylaws strictly limited rental properties, but there were loopholes. And Karen had clearly found one. The board scrambled to meet. A temporary emergency clause was passed to block corporate rentals until a vote could be held. Karen countered by attempting to sue the HOA again, this time claiming retaliatory policy changes aimed at sabotaging her livelihood. This woman had gone full scorched earth, and honestly, I was kind of impressed by the sheer energy it must have taken to burn so many bridges while simultaneously drowning in her own legal quicksand. But the real breaking point came when one of the corporate reps showed up for a walkthrough and spotted the land lease agreement posted on a sign by the clubhouse path. They called me. I confirmed that access to the amenities was contingent on approval by the parcel owner, me. They dropped the deal within the week. Karen tried relisting the house. This time, no lies, no fluff. Just a desperate attempt to cut and run. The price dropped again. One buyer came for a tour, saw the lien notice taped inside the electrical box, and walked out before reaching the kitchen. By now, her yard was overgrown, the paint on her porch railing was peeling, and the garden gnomes were sun-bleached and tilted like they were giving up. The house didn't look like a villain's lair anymore. It looked like a sad monument to one woman's war against reality. And then, one morning, it was over. A moving truck pulled up. Karen, dressed in leggings and a hoodie, barely glanced at the neighbors as her furniture was hauled out. She didn't wave, didn't yell, didn't even glare. She just got into the passenger seat of her car and drove off with her husband, leaving the house empty and the HOA lien unpaid. A month later, a new family moved in. Young couple, friendly, brought cookies to introduce themselves. The wife asked if the neighborhood had any drama. I told her it used to, but the queen had abdicated. She didn't get it. But that was okay. I liked it better that way. With Karen gone, the air felt lighter. The flowers seemed to bloom brighter. The walking trail didn't buzz with surveillance drones anymore. And the pool? Crystal clear. Peaceful. Private. I stood there one afternoon, grilling burgers for the new neighbors, watching their kids play in a sprinkler, and realized something strange. For the first time in years, I wasn't scheming. I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I wasn't playing defense or offense. I was just living. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done with life. People like her don't disappear. They relocate. They rebrand. They find a new HOA, a new playground for their authoritarian instincts. And wherever she went, I pitted the next person with a pool. 3 months after Karen vanished from the neighborhood, everything finally settled into the kind of boring, pleasant rhythm that used to feel like a distant fantasy. Saturday mornings meant coffee on the porch with quiet neighbors, not early morning violations. HOA meetings became productive and uneventful, with no yelling, no threats, and no laminated bylaws waved like holy scriptures. Brett even started joking again. Mr. Conway nominated himself Minister of Snacks. The tension that once hung over the neighborhood like a low-pressure system had completely lifted, and for a moment I believed it might last. But peace is weird. After so long in battle mode, your instincts get jumpy. You start second-guessing the calm. You hear the wind blow through your hedges and wonder if it's carrying a threat. You see an unfamiliar car driving slowly down the street and think, is that a realtor or a reconnaissance mission? I tried to ignore it, tried to breathe. But then, one ordinary Thursday afternoon, a familiar voice showed up in the most cursed place possible, my voicemail. It started chipper, fake-friendly, like a person trying to pretend they hadn't tried to stage a soft coup using a pool noodle and a drone. Hi. This is Karen. I know, surprise. I just wanted to reach out with a little opportunity you might be interested in. I've started a new venture and I think your property could really benefit. Call me back." I stared at the screen like it had personally insulted my bloodline. Karen had moved 900 miles away, some HOA retirement village in Florida, according to neighborhood gossip, and yet somehow her voice was still polluting my ears. I didn't call back. I didn't respond. But I did block her number, which only meant that 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail, printed on letterhead that said Visionary Community Consultants, LLC. The letter was an invitation to join her new homeowner advisory group. According to Karen, she was leveraging years of executive HOA leadership experience to coach select properties into achieving maximum community harmony and resale value. She even included a trifold brochure with images of pristine lawns, smiling couples, and a clip art handshake. In the corner was her headshot, heavily filtered, standing in front of what I recognized as a clubhouse that definitely wasn't hers anymore. I didn't respond. I burned it. Not metaphorically. I literally lit it on fire in my grill, right between a pair of bratwursts. Still, something about that letter stuck with me. It wasn't the gall, it was the strategy. Karen wasn't just starting over. She was franchising her tyranny, spreading it like a virus to other unsuspecting neighborhoods. And worst of all, she was using my community as part of her portfolio. On her website, yes, I checked, there was a section called Case Studies, and right at the top, Historic Turnaround, Suburban Conflict Resolved Through Assertive Policy Implementation. The pictures? My backyard. My pool. Even a blurred shot of my house. I nearly swallowed my tongue. I called Brett. "You're not going to believe this," I said. I was wrong. He absolutely did believe it. "You're not the first one," he said. "Karen's been contacting other people from the neighborhood, too. Conway got an email last week asking if he'd like to submit a testimonial." "What did he say?" "He sent her a photo of his dog taking a dump on her old lawn. Beautiful. But the more we looked into it, the more surreal it became. Karen had launched a full online brand. She was hosting webinars, giving talks to aspiring HOA board members, and even writing a self-published ebook titled From Chaos to Control: How I Fixed a Community One Rule at a Time. And right there in the table of contents, Chapter 3. Dealing with difficult homeowners who resist progress. That wasn't a metaphor. That was me. It would have been easy to let it go. Just shrug, say, well, at least she's gone, and get back to my barbecue. But that would have been too easy. Too kind. Too on me. After everything she put this neighborhood through, the idea of her making money off her revisionist HOA history didn't sit right. So I called my lawyer friend. He read the website. He read the ebook. He nearly choked laughing. She put your house in her promotional material without permission. That's an image rights violation. You could sue. But would I win? Oh, almost certainly. Especially with how well documented her past harassment is. So we filed a cease and desist. Sent her a formal demand to remove all references to my property, my neighborhood, and my image from every platform she owned. Included were photos, parcel IDs, dated correspondence, and a helpful reminder that the drone footage she used had already been flagged once before as illegal surveillance. She didn't respond. But 2 weeks later, the website changed. My house was gone. The case study was replaced with a vague, suburban example. And the ebook? It was pulled from Amazon entirely. In its place was a new one titled Leading with Grace: Modern HOA Mentorship in a Changing World. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my deck. The neighborhood got wind of it too. Someone printed out screenshots of the old website and pinned them on the clubhouse bulletin board under the title Karen's Delusional Greatest Hits. Another neighbor hosted a case study barbecue where we all sat around retelling our favorite Karen horror stories. The drone incident. The time she fined someone for having a flag that fluttered too enthusiastically. The brief period when she attempted to require everyone to grow only native grasses. But the funniest part? The very thing she tried to control, the neighborhood, was the thing that ultimately erased her from it. The new residents had no idea who she was. The board moved on. Kids played in the street. Dogs barked. Lawns grew a little wild without incident. And people smiled more. Karen had tried to force perfection into every square foot of our lives, and in doing so, she'd become the perfect example of what not to be. As for me, I kept the parcel of land under the clubhouse, not for profit, not for leverage, just for peace of mind. I liked knowing that no matter what new faces came and went on the board, no one would ever again use that space to impose control over the rest of us. And if they tried, well, I still had the paperwork and the hose. That summer, I hosted another backyard barbecue, bigger than the last. Open invite. People brought food, kids jumped in the pool, and the only HOA rule we observed was, don't double dip in the salsa. Someone brought music, someone else brought water balloons. At one point, Brett climbed onto a deck chair and made a toast. To the greatest HOA president we never had, he said, nodding at me. For defending the sacred American right to mind your own business. Everyone cheered. Even Conway's corgi barked. I stood there, burger in hand, pool shimmering behind me, and realized this was the final chapter. Not just of Karen, but of the war. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer had to fight. Victory didn't look like a courtroom or a dramatic eviction. It looked like neighborhood kids doing cannonballs into a pool that wasn't drained. It looked like flowers blooming without permission slip. It looked like freedom, quiet, stubborn, sunlit freedom. And Karen? Wherever she was, I hoped she found another neighborhood to torment. Because this one was closed for repairs. Permanently. The HOA might have tried to hold a ceremony at my pool without permission. But I drained it. Then I filled it back up, with people who actually belonged.